Welcome to the Mandala Podcast, where we help you feel your best body, mind, and soul. Well, welcome back, listeners and viewers. Charlie McDermott, co-host, producer of the show, back here with Bree Jaworski. Bree, how you doing today?
I'm awesome. So to start off, I kind of tricked you because we were just chatting right before we started.
We were, and
I didn't ask you this, but I'm going to ask you this now that we're recording. So I was out to dinner with a friend the other night, and she said, Bree, Charlie, the guy that does your podcast with you, is he the dad of Charlie McDermott that's on the middle? And I said, I don't know. I actually feel embarrassed that I don't know the answer to that question. And she was like, I think it's his dad. And I'm like, I don't know. I'll have to ask him on Tuesday. So what say you, Charlie? What is the answer to that question?
So it's funny. Barbara and I were just talking about this yesterday. She teaches Group X classes. Mm-hmm. And this is weird. And this was last year. And this is on Fort Myers Beach. She taught at the community center. Mm-hmm. And a woman comes up to her and she says, man, you have the same mannerisms as my favorite actor. And Barb's like, oh, well, that's neat. And she said, just out of curiosity, who's that? And she says, that kid Axel in the middle. And Barb goes, oh, I'm his mom.
That makes sense. That's so funny.
So there you go. Yeah.
So, I mean, I have to admit, I've never seen the show and I did not put that together. Maybe I would have. But she's a big fan of the show. So shout out to Rachel if you're listening. We have confirmed that Charlie is in fact Charlie's dad. So there you go. Yep. But she apparently her and her husband watched the show like religiously, and she was like, I swear it's gotta be him. Like, who else? I'm like, I'll ask him. I don't know.
It really well done show. I mean, it's off air now, but you can watch the reruns and great. I mean, just great message. It was almost like a series you'd see in, whatever, back in the 80s, 90s, it's just great writing. And we spent a good amount of time on the set there and got to meet folks like Patricia Heaton. Dick Van Dyke was often a guest. We happened to be there one day. I mean, how cool is that? Like the guy that was on Mary Poppins, dancing on rooftops.
Yeah, that is really cool. Do you have a famous son? I didn't even know this about you. I still liked you regardless of having a famous son. I did not know that piece. So I think if your son is cool or your kid is cool in general, you get points for that, like I tell my son how cute he is, and then I have to remind myself, like, I did have something to do with that, so I get credit.
There you go. That's the point.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's a total side note, but
that's good. I appreciate that surprise there. Didn't see that.
The mystery has been solved, Rachel. So
all right, now on to the more important topic.
Yes.
And to your point, talking off air and in the previous episode, I know you got into MDR therapy, and I think our plan, now I'm all thrown off, was to kind of dig into that deeper today.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of people ask questions about EMDR. And it's one of those things where I get a lot of the same questions over and over and over. So I thought, hey, why not just do a podcast? We'll do some frequently asked questions about EMDR. So Charlie's going to ask me the questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them in a way that's kind of easy to understand, because EMDR can be a little bit confusing, but we'll try to keep it like, in layman's terms today.
All right. So the first question is, how do you spell it? No, just kidding.
EMDR.
And then the follow-up to that is, what is it? What is EMDR therapy?
Yes. Okay. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a mouthful, and that's why we call it EMDR. But basically, EMDR is a clinical treatment that we use. You have to have not every therapist can do it. You have to have a special training in order to do it. And I say training and then supplemental, you do clinical experience and supervision and all that stuff. And any of my clinical people out there will understand what I mean by that. So, but yes, so you have to find a therapist that is trained in EMDR. I don't just assume that you go to any therapist and they will be. So I have 4 therapists that work for me. there's 5 of us total in my practice, and I'm the only one that does it here. I would like for some of my therapists to get trained in it. That would be great. But as of right now, I'm the only one who does it. So if you're looking for EMDR, I would be the one who would take that on. But basically, it's a clinical treatment. It's used to process traumatic events that have happened, basically traumatic memories. And we use bilateral stimulation that mimics REM sleep cycle. So people, if you're watching or listening, your eyes go back and forth rapidly, rapid eye movement in your sleep, and that's when you process memories. So we mimic that with EMDR to go back to a traumatic memory, reprocess it correctly, and so that you don't have the emotional attachment, emotional reaction when the memory comes up. So that's kind of EMDR in a nutshell, which is still
Wow.
probably pretty confusing, but that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So is that like a one-time deal, a one-session cure?
So it's not one session, but anybody that's familiar with psychotherapy in general, it can be a very long process.
Right.
A lot of people have a lot of stuff, and I think some people come in for a variety of reasons. I think I see some clients that at this point just come in kind of like for maintenance. They come in like once a month just to kind of like debrief, tell me what's going on with their life, chat. Some people literally come in to talk. I feel like maybe they don't have a lot of people to talk to. They need someone to talk to. That's fine. But if you're familiar with psychotherapy, you know that like it can be a long process. Some people are in therapy for years. And so when we're looking at something like EMDR, it's a short term treatment. It's not going to be years. We're talking a set amount of, and I say set, it's different for every person, but it may be between 5 and 9 sessions per person. So it's
Okay.
it's a very short treatment, comparatively speaking, when you're looking at something like traditional talk therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. So then once you're through that breed, are those effects maintained over time?
So they are. They've done a lot of studies on, I think they did like 9 clinical studies on EMDR and its effect, and 8 out of the 9 showed that the effects were permanent or
Oh,
maintained.
wow. Yeah.
Also, I would add the great thing about EMDR as a process that's short term is that even if you feel like things, like if you get through the whole EMDR process, feel like you're very like desensitized to these traumatic memories or sounds, sense, whatever it is that's triggering you initially, you can always go back for what I like to call like a touch up or a few sessions of touch up EMDR, which can kind of desensitize you again to it. So if you do feel like down the line, like a year later, 2 years later, you wouldn't have to go through the whole process of EMDR because a lot of it is what we call resourcing in EMDR, where we're kind of just like gearing up for the actual desensitization part. And so you would just come in and maybe work on and desensitize for that little bit of issue that you're having. And we do a lot of scales in EMDR. So like, for instance, I'll ask someone like, how distressing is something on a scale of, 0 to 10,
Mm.
at 10 being like the most distressing thing possible. And a lot of people are at like a 9 or a 10 when they start, and they end up at a 0, usually 0, but sometimes 1. Um, but you may only be at like when you start to notice things kind of flaring up, you may be at like a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. So it's nowhere near where it was to begin with. But even if you find yourself at a 4 or 5 and you want to get back down to a 0, you can always come in for like a session or 2. And that usually is very helpful too.
All right. All right. So how about when it comes to phobias, panic disorder, or disorders,
Yeah.
agoraphobia? I can't even say it. Agoraphobia.
Yeah. Agoraphobia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I found, and most people that do EMDR, is that if you're just treating like a panic disorder or agoraphobia or something like that, or a phobia in general, it works very well if the thing that is the phobia or agoraphobia, panic disorder, is followed by a trauma. So it's with EMDR, it's always kind of follow the trauma. If there is a trauma associated with why you have, and some people have phobias for no reason. Um, they can't identify an actual trauma, which you can still work with EMDR because we do what's called a future template, where we come up with like basically like a a situation that could happen in the future that's bringing them a lot of distress. But typically, if somebody has a phobia, they've already had some, like, for instance, I had a client who had a phobia of vomiting. And so herself vomiting, other people vomiting around her. And so she'd already had experience. I mean, everybody has an experience where they've come across someone vomiting or you've vomited yourself, So it's easy to draw from those type of experiences. So for her, we just worked on those. And then we did some future, like, made up templates that she was scared of, like having kids someday and having the kids vomit and, things like that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's things that
Yeah.
we can draw on from EMDR, but typically, even if somebody doesn't have a trauma associated with the phobia, they have had traumatic experiences since having the phobia. So we can use those. But basically, we need to find some sort of trauma, because that's really the key in EMDR, is going back to the trauma, reprocessing it correctly, and desensitizing the person to it. So as long as there's some kind of trauma, we should be able to work on it.
Okay. Any side effects with this process?
So, not gonna lie to you, there can
Yeah.
be. I I 1000% believe in informed consent. So this is something that I tell every single person before they get started. So some of the things could include. I feel like I'm one of those like pharmaceutical ads, like side effects may include. We're not putting it in
Yeah.
like tiny little letters. We're just telling people what it actually is. So the first thing would be like high levels of emotion. Sometimes when you're in the session, I've seen a lot of crying. I've seen a lot of, and I'm not just talking crying, I'm talking like hysterical crying. Things sometimes emerge in your memory that you knew of, and you knew that they were there, but you hadn't thought about them in a long time, kind of thing. There can be physical sensations. There can be, you can have dreams, sometimes nightmares, headaches, a lot of headaches.
Hmm.
After we do the desensitization part, just fogginess, general fogginess. I think I do EMDR. I try obviously to follow the EMDR protocol like with fidelity, but at the same time, because I've been doing it for many years, I've noticed that people that have the best reactions to EMDR and the best results with EMDR kind of follow a process. And so I think that part is maybe a little bit unique to me, in the way that I schedule the EMDR and that kind of thing. And so typically in like the week, for example, that we're doing the actual like desensitization part, I'll tell people like, if you can take the week off work, that would be ideal. You don't have to. I mean, you'll still be able to like function. It's not like you'll be like out for the count. It's not like recovering from a surgery, but you might be foggy. You might have headaches. You might not have slept well the night before. You might have had a nightmare. If you're able to take that week off, I always suggest that people do. And sometimes they have no side effects whatsoever and they're perfectly fine. But just like as a safeguard, just at the very least, I tell them like when we first start that part, like don't have anything major to do that day. Like, go home, take it easy, rest, don't have like some big event that night or have to go to work afterwards or that kind of thing, So I always talk to people about that because there are side effects to everything. The thing with EMDR is it's not a one size fits all. And so a lot of people have a lot of different side effects, but I always ask people about them. And so that's how I've kind of compiled that list that I just rattled off. It's just stuff that people have told me that they've experienced, and not every person would experience all those things, but sometimes it's just a headache, or it's just, oh, I felt really tired for like a couple days, or, oh, I just felt like, a little bit less anxious, but also I had some nightmares, or, who knows?
Yeah.
So all of those things are possible, or none of those things are possible.
Yeah.
Depends on the person.
So then going back a little bit, number of sessions, you said somewhere between 5 and 9, right?
Yes. Yeah,
So
typically.
should they be within a certain period of time then? How does that
They
work?
they don't have to be, but
Okay.
I do find that it's more effective if they are. So
Yeah.
another thing that I do probably a little bit differently than other people who do EMDR as far as clinicians, some people will do the desensitization part for X amount of time in that session, like meaning they might go an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours just in that one session.
In one session.
Yes.
Wow.
I don't. I think
Okay.
it's too much. I think
Yeah.
it's overwhelming. And talk about side effects. I feel like the side effects are much more severe if you're doing like a prolonged session like that.
I
And
would
so
think that
what
would
I
be
would
like
prefer to do, what's that?
it sounds exhausting to go
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
totally,
Yeah.
totally exhausting. And so like what I would prefer to do is maybe you come in 3 times that week and we do a 50 to 60-minute
Yeah.
session 3 times a week and spread it out a little bit that way. But yeah, I would definitely want the desensitization part to be more condensed, like meaning like within 1 week or that week and a little part of the next week kind of thing, versus like one session here, one session next week, one session in 3 weeks from now. Like, I feel like it's better to just work on it, commit to it, work on it. And that's what I've been telling people recently. Like, I get it. Like, I know it's hard to take off work, or, financially that might be something that's difficult, but you have to remember again, like, this is a short-term treatment. So, and it has incredible results. And so financially and, time-wise, if you can invest that amount into that short amount of time, I really do feel like it'll be
Yeah.
very, very worth it to someone. Like, how do you put a dollar amount on your happiness, on your level of functioning day to day? Like, you know, a lot of people that come in, I just finished with someone doing EMDR, and she said like her a normal day with not anything strange going on. Like, she is at like a normal functioning level of like a 6 to 7 out of 10 of anxiety all the
Mm,
time. Like, that's
mm.
just her baseline. And
Wow.
so to live like that and then not to have to live like that
Right.
within 1 week, if we're looking at a realistic timeline of what she, between when we started the meat and potatoes of the EMDR
Yeah.
and the finish was about 1 week. And so for her, going from a 7 out of 10 of anxiety every single day, waking up like that, to now 0, I think she would say it was worth it. So, you know? So, I know I am fully aware it's a time commitment, it's a financial commitment, but I really do feel confident that the results will more than pay for
Mm,
themselves in regards to just quality of life, for sure.
yeah.
So, but yeah,
Yeah.
5 to 9 sessions typically.
Okay. Okay. So is EMDR the same as hypnosis?
Yeah, so that's a question that I do get asked a lot. I'm not like trained in hypnosis at all. Like, I don't claim to be an expert on it at all, so I can mostly speak to EMDR, but hypnosis, like, I think basically they're trying to get you into like a trance like state, where you're more receptive to ideas. So let's think of like someone who wants to stop smoking, like smoking cessation. You might go to hypnotherapy because when in this hypnotic state, you are more receptive to someone telling your, subconscious mind not to smoke, the reasons why you don't want to smoke, and putting positive reinforcement in there, like you want to live a healthy life, you want to live a long life, and you're in this state where you're more receptive to those ideas. Uh Hypnosis is not what they show on TV, where like people are running around crazy and like doing whatever the guy or woman hypnotist tells them to do. It's not like that. You are fully conscious when you're doing hypnosis. You are just kind of in a I say fully conscious meaning like you have free will. You can still
Mhm.
do and or not do whatever, they're suggesting you do, but your subconscious mind is more suggestible. So with EMDR, we are really trying to get you not in a state of trance or a state because we actually have to go back to that trauma, whatever it is. We call it the target in EMDR, but that trauma that probably brought you in. And we need you to be really conscious of the trauma, because we're trying to, in that one session, bring you back there, almost trick your brain into thinking that you're back there so that it can reprocess the memory. Your brain, and that's, we've talked about a lot about this on the show, Charlie, but like, words being very important, the words that we say, the thoughts that we have, they all have meaning. And this kind of ties into that, because our brain can't really differentiate between reality and thoughts. And so that's when I say we trick our brain into thinking that we're back in this traumatic situation. Like, we use very descriptive, what did it smell like? What did it taste like? What did
Mhm.
it, what did the room look like? Who was there with you? We use all the senses to try to submerge the person back into that memory so that we can reprocess it correctly, because that's basically what's happened when people have trauma is that the trauma has interfered with the person's brain, their ability to process that trauma correctly. And that's why it constantly comes up. People are being triggered by different things. And so it sounds terrible the way, I'm like, we have to relive this trauma, but it's just that one session where we're having, and after that session, like, again, I'll use a scale, like say you're at a 10 out of 10 out of, distress in regards to this one particular situation, the next session where we go back to the target, you may only be at a 6 out of 10. So you may still go back there in your mind, but it's not going to be as distressing as it is that one time. And we put a lot of safeguards in place before that first session where we're doing that to make sure that people are okay and we're there with them. They know they're in a safe space and that kind of thing. So, we want them to be fully conscious of that trauma. So that's one way that it differs from hypnosis. Definitely, we're focusing on what we call the positive and the negative cognition, the belief that trauma has caused us to believe about ourselves. And so, yeah, and a lot of it's based on grounding ourselves in reality, grounding ourselves. Whereas hypnosis can be not so much. Like, again, you're like in that trance state, so you're not really like grounded. So it's very different. It's very, very different. It may look like if there was a fly on the
Yeah.
wall, the fly might be like, yeah, this looks kind of similar.
Yeah.
But the nuts and bolts of how it works and everything about it is really, really different. So I don't know. Again, sometimes I feel like maybe I made things more confusing than less. But anyway, but
Well,
I do get asked about the hypnosis thing a lot, though. So
yeah. I'll bet. And the part I don't want to forget, and we alluded to it in the beginning, previous episode, you brought on a guest who
mm-hmm.
shared the experience.
Yes. Yeah.
So for listeners who want to hear it from someone who's gone through this, that's a great episode to listen to.
Yes, great point. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've actually referred back to that many times with people, new potential clients coming in. And Amber was so gracious to, give her experience, like talk about her
Yeah.
experience with
Yeah.
EMDR. So hopefully between this episode and that one, people can get some kind of an inside look into what it's like to be the client of EMDR and also get some of their questions answered. So that's
Yeah.
my hope with this one too.
And final summary, Bree, and you've touched on this all throughout, but just someone's listening up to this point and they're like, it sounds like it could help, but I'm not sure. How would you describe an individual who could be helped by EMDR?
So anyone that has either a singular trauma that is impacting their life negatively at this current time, or complex trauma. And with complex trauma, sometimes we may need to do several rounds of EMDR. EMDR kind of works in themes. So if we can group any of the traumas in with a theme, we can usually knock them all out at once, which is really cool. So if somebody has multiple traumas or complex trauma, and we can find a theme, a negative cognition that kind of touches on all of them. I don't know. It's hard. I know you guys are listening, but the graphs, I always think of it in terms of this, like the circle, and then it has like the lines that stem out from the circle and it has like the other little circles all around it. Like, I don't know what those graphs are called, but I don't know. But, basically it's like that. If we can come up with this main theme, and it can string off to these other minor themes, then when we do the EMDR, it really can affect all of those traumas, even if they're totally different. And so that is really cool. And so, and yeah, anyone that has any sort of trauma, which I think is pretty much everybody, but I would say trauma that's like in the current moment really negatively affecting you in your day-to-day life. But also I've had really great experience with working with people with phobias. Even if you don't, again, know where the phobia started from or it isn't directly related to a trauma, chances are you've had some sort of traumatic experience related to having that phobia. And yeah, and so I don't know. I feel like it could help a lot of people, but basically anybody who's having a really hard time in their current day-to-day life functioning, and that can stem back somehow to something traumatic that's happened to them, I feel like they would have a really good result. I can only speak for myself as a clinician and like my experience working with people. And I've had really, really good results with the clients that I've worked with EMDR. I've never had anyone be like, this did nothing for me and that was a waste of my time. And I've also never had anyone get worse, so
Yeah.
the only person I can say that I know of that has gone through a little bit of the experience and not really had much of anything was me. And I went through EMDR in the training. We're all a
Uh-huh.
bunch of therapists and clinicians, and we're having to do EMDR on each other when we're training. And it just, I felt like it wasn't super effective for me.
Uh-huh.
But I've never had that experience with a client coming in. So I know it's possible. And I tell everybody that too, like it's possible that it may just like not have an effect on you.
Yeah.
But I've never seen anybody feel worse afterwards. And usually it's pretty life-changing. Like the person I just finished EMDR with, we had like a follow-up session and
Mm-hmm.
she is just, she says like her life is just like completely different. Like she feels like she's started a new chapter of her life. And like the people that knew her, like pre-EMDR, like have to relearn who she is now because she's like a different, like better, more like version 2.0, like new and improved
Right.
version, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Bree, again, you knocked it out of the park, and we'll talk again in the next episode. Until then, keep doing what you're doing there.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Mandala Podcast. To learn more about Mandala counseling and health coaching, go to www.mandala-counseling.com. That's www.mandala, MandalaCounseling, COUNSELING.com, or call 239-360-1983, or visit us on Facebook or Instagram.